Hey, everybody. This one, I feel like giggling. I spilled champagne on my show notes, so it's already, the wheels are shaking. But welcome to Day Drinking with Authors in the, darkest night of all. This is the interview series where I pick a book, the author picks a drink, and we discuss both. Tonight, A+ book, A+ drink. My guest is pretty A+ too. This is going to be a lot of fun. So tonight, my guest is Viola Shipman. And Viola Shipman is the pen name for bestselling author Wade Rouse. So he'll be here to discuss his best-selling book, The Secret of Snow. And I'm going to read the back cover copy because my mom likes that. And my mom would really like this book. We're going to talk a lot about moms in this interview because we have some mom things in common. So here's the cover. I actually have a paperback copy of the book. I don't often look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? It really does look like Michigan. Anyway, when Sunny Dunes, a SoCal meteorologist whose job is all sunshine and 72-degree days, is replaced by a virtual meteorologist that will never age, gain weight, or renegotiate its contract, the only station willing to give the 50-year-old another shot is the very place Sunny's been avoiding since the day she left for college, her northern Michigan hometown. Sunny grudgingly returns to the long, cold, snowy winters of her childhood with the added humiliation of moving back in with her mother. Not quite an outsider, but no longer a local, Sunny finds her past blindsiding her everywhere, from the high school friends she ghosted to the former journalism classmate and mortal frenemy who's now her boss, to, most keenly, the death years ago of her younger sister who loved the snow. To distract herself from the memories she spent her life trying to outrun, Sunny throws herself headfirst into covering every small town winter event to woo a new audience, made more bearable by a handsome widower with optimism to spare. But with someone trying to undermine her efforts to rebuild her career, Sunny must make peace with who she used to be and allow her heart to thaw if she's ever going to find a place she can truly call home. It's a perfect winter read. It's not even like a Christmas read, it's a winter read. So let's bring in Wade.
Cheers.
Wade, you've come from a couple of parties, haven't you?
I love before we started, you go, I like an author coming in hot. I'm coming in like there's flames behind me. So cheers. Thank you for having me. And I'm also a huge fan of yours. You wrote one of my favorite books ever. And I cheers and happy holidays.
Well, and to you, I mean, in the author world, Wade blurbed my book that happened at the very beginning of the pandemic, which was the bitter and sweet of cherry season. And in the writer world, it's such a awkward thing to ask, but it's such a gift to receive. Like, it's such a beautiful thing to have an author you love and respect say something nice about your book. So thank you very much.
I mean, thank you. Honestly, your book truthfully changed how I wrote a little bit. It was you are sparse with words and rich with emotion, and it really influenced how I approached a new book. So I mean that truly. Well,
I really appreciate that. I mean, to get into the nitty gritty of it all, that was a new thing I learned. It all came from working with. I worked with a fairly new editor to me, and she really taught me that streamlined emotional punch. And I was like, that's never going to work. And then
it did.
You actually, again, to get deep into writer stuff, your editor. It was my very first editor when I first started writing Harlequin novels. Yeah. Susan.
Wow, I did not know that.
I know.
You're full circle.
It's true. It's true. But we are not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about, first of all, this delicious drink, the poinsettia.
A poinsettia. Isn't it a good? It's and my problem is I didn't even just do a champagne glass. I just went full in.
We need things with straws.
I'm like 2 ounces my rear.
Is this your holiday go-to drink?
I really like it. I think it's, I like a lot of champagne at the holidays because I don't think I have it that much during the year. So it seems festive. I can put a lot down, and it's pretty.
Spoken like a writer.
Pretty. It's pretty like me.
It is pretty like you. This is like a Christmas morning drink. It's a wrapping presents drink. It's light. It's not. This is a gift. Thank you.
It's a good sipper, and I have it a lot. If with appetizers before like a holiday dinner or something like that. Before you're really going out and you're going to get some wine later or something like that.
That's very good. So for everybody listening, the secret, it's champagne and cranberry juice, but the secret is a little bit of triple sec or Grand Marnier.
Yeah.
This really makes it awesome.
Kicks it up a notch.
Kicks it up a notch. Speaking of kicked up a notch, how about that for a segue? It's like I'm a pro.
No notes.
You have always in your career used very personal, your stories are very personal. Your pen name is actually, I know you've probably told the story a million times, but for our listeners, would you share the story of your pen name?
Yeah. That's a question I always give because it sounds very like a literary Victor Victoria, doesn't it? For a man to be using a woman's name. But, I chose it for a very personal, not professional reason. Viola Shipman was my grandma. She was a working poor seamstress in the Ozarks. Her and my grandpa Shipman had nothing, barely 2 dimes to rub together. My grandpa Shipman was an ore miner. They saved change for my mom to be able to go to college, filled an old crock in their garage. And when it got full of change, they took it to the community bank and started a college fund for my mom. She sacrificed everything for me to be who I am. And, I always say my grandma got what so many of us struggle with. She got what matters most in life. Didn't have a lot of money, but was rich in knowledge. And it's just, as we've been reminded the last 2 years, it's our health and each other, having a roof over our heads. It's the simple things that really add up. And, that was the foundation of my life. It's the reason I'm here. And I want it to be a foundation of every book that I write. So, Viola, people always think it's going to be a house coat, like a wig.
No,
which I do have.
It's a name that, this is going to sound stupid, but it's a name that feels lived in. It feels like, for a pen name, that it is a real person's name is, of course, gives it so much weight, particularly to you. But it's a great pen name.
It's a beautiful. It's a pretty name, and people ask why I didn't choose my other grandma, and I'm like, her name was Madge. So sorry.
Sorry, Madge. I have a Trudy.
Oh, I like a Trudy.
My husband has always said he's never met a Trudy he didn't like. I'm like, how many Trudys have you met?
Now there's a story.
So you have used not just your grandmother's name, but inspirations from her life for many of your books. But this book in particular, as a person who's read many of your books, and feels very personal. Like, it feels like you really mined some serious trauma. Not just trauma, also joy, like Christmas in your family seems like it must have been a big deal. Can you talk a little bit about that process? And was it uncomfortable? Did you doubt it at any point?
Wow. Yeah. Great question. I did. This is my most deeply personal novel. I started my career writing memoir, and that's kind of informs everything that I write. I kind of come from that very personal nature. I have to be fully invested in a book before I start it. My grandmother was my family. We were the Griswolds. We were full on Christmas. We still are. We decorate 9 trees.
I can't imagine looking at you.
You
don't say.
Really. And it just
around your house.
I have visceral memories of my grandmother. She bought so many gifts. She'd have to cut a pathway through all of the presents to get to her kitchen in our house. She was amazing. And I lost my brother when I was 13, and he was, much like this novel is based on, was our king of Christmas. He was the kid that went in our Ozarks woods and cut a pine tree down and dragged it in our house and drenched it in tinsel. And I thought our holidays would never be the same. And, my mom was a hospice nurse, and my grandma Shipman, the very next year after my brother passed away, I came home and they were in the living room, and they walked into the backwoods, cut a tree down and put it up in our house and drenched it in tinsel. And my mom said, we should never forget. We should always celebrate his memory. And, what was a life-changing moment, and what could have been a life-ending moment for all of us, became a new start for me personally. So, I've said this only a couple of times, but I got a copy of Nancy Thayer's book a couple of years ago, Let It Snow, which was just made into a Hallmark movie. And in the inscription, she put, Wade, why have you never written a winter book or a holiday book? And as you said, it was too personal for me really to broach, and even in fiction. But it just feels like with what we've gone through the last 2 years, the timing seemed right to allow people to give voice to loss and grief, to feel less than. We always have to feel so perfect this time of year. And also just, it's okay to remember and celebrate, and reach out to people who need it right now. So all of that kind of coalesced for me to write this book in kind of a contemporary, more fun way.
Yeah, certainly. Did you ever doubt it? Were you ever like, were you worried about your family? Like, I mean, because the ornament, or the star on top of the Christmas tree, which is a real life thing for you. Like, you use a lot of family things, which is lovely and beautiful, and it adds a level of believability to the story. But I just had to wonder, were you like, look, everybody, I'm using some family artifacts here.
I do. Yeah, I've always pulled it. And, I did have a little doubt with this one more than the others. When I was talking with Susan about it, I think trying to take kind of a very topically fun story of a 50-year-old woman that loses her job to an artificial intelligent weather girl and has to go home, would that couple well with a pretty much deeper issue at its core? So we talked it out a lot, how I was going to make it work, and, not hammering people over the head with it, but letting, as memories do, kind of come to the surface slowly. So it did. I think it's the best novel I've written.
I agree. I really do. I feel like you hit a real path through this story.
And it kind of how I'm looking at the novel I just wrote and the next upcoming winter book. It's changed kind of how I'm approaching it. I think I'm going a little more deeply personal, but kind of keeping this contemporary feel, which I think is a perfect mix with Viola and maybe Wade too. It's all coming out.
It's all happening. It's funny when you having read the book and then having read the author's note, and when an author says a lot of this stuff is from my life, you read back through the scenes of a book and you think about, like, the scene that killed me in this book, that just gutted me, was, and I don't know if it's going to be the one that you think it's going to be, but when Mason, who's the love interest with all the optimism, is telling the story about how his wife, who had committed suicide, how she was putting all her jewelry on her bed and putting the names by everybody, like where she wanted the jewelry to go, which as a reader who's had people in her life who had committed suicide, I was like, oh my God, that's exactly how that went. Like, it was just really got me. That had to be.
And you're exactly right. I mean, that was another personal story. I had a family member that committed suicide, and it was a very similar story. So, it's just, to me, it's the only way I know how to approach writing, is if it, if it's impacted me in some way deeply in my life, it sticks with me forever. Or I'm like you too. I'm one of those authors that gets invited to parties and is always taking notes. Drops a story or says something, or like a fruity name, I write it. I'm always writing.
Yes, it's true. And this is funny. I feel like we dipped right into the serious part of the book, because it is actually very light. Like, it is very, I mean, there's a bit of desperation to Sunny, but what she's doing is funny. Like, the things that are happening are pretty funny. So when you're approaching a book, is it hard to remember to keep it light, or is that the easy part?
That's the easy part for me. Surprise. I think having started writing humorous memoir, it's what comes easier for me maybe than the harder scenes. Humor's always been a way. I grew up loving Irma Bombeck. A gay kid growing up in the Ozarks in the 70s, not easy. And I think humor was always the way I reached people, but also kept people at bay a little bit. It could work in both ways for me. So humor is always my go-to in a way to make people feel comfortable and readers feel comfortable, but also as a way to maybe keep a distance around myself so I don't get hurt as well. And I liked bringing that to the book. Sunny, I love Lucy and all of that kind of humor. And, I thought that worked well. I always think if you're writing about something very serious, as I often did in Memoir, you got to lift people up out of it.
Yeah,
and then it resonates even more deeply.
So was the jump from Memoir to fiction, was that fairly easy, or was that
the nightmare?
Oh, do tell. Tell me more.
We're going to get really honest here tonight. I'd written 4 memoirs. I'd written another memoir. It did not sell. My agent could not sell it. And it's weird. It was about, I called it a hair moir. It was about our obsessions with our hair, or my hair growing up in life, the different styles I've had. But it coalesced with my mother, who was like my grandmother, totally ego-free, who got cancer and could give a wit about how she looked, or dealing with a wig or any of that. She's like, And so it was a very odd memoir that my agent really couldn't do anything with. And I just kind of went off a deep end. I was trying still, but nothing was coming easy as memoir. I felt like I needed distance in my life again.
Mm-hmm.
And I found, I was moving my dad into a smaller home. He was a royal pain in the patootie. And I found all my grandmother's heirlooms boxed away, their charm bracelets and recipe boxes. And I was like, because they used to tell me all the stories behind them, and as working poor women, these little trinkets meant everything. And I was like, ooh, maybe I could do something with it. But writing fiction is not easy. And it's totally different than writing memoir. The structure and the depth of character versus kind of using yourself as the foil was very hard. And my agent, it took me almost 3 years to write my first novel, The Charm Bracelet. And she kept sending me back over and over and over, going, you're going to get one shot at this. If I'm sending it out to editors and you're a new writer of fiction, you get one chance or it's over. And so she made me perfect that. And she also said, as a man writing fiction for women and writing about generations of women, you got to get it right. Yeah. So it was a difficult, long process. And I feel like I'm finally coming to terms with it, but it's not easy. People are like, writing a novel easy. No, it was not. It was not for me.
Yeah, I would imagine I've been on a break. Last year I just had a burnout and I was like, I don't even know how you write scenes. When you think about writing a scene, you set up the scene and something happens and then things change at the end of the scene. You're like, I gotta do that 45 times. That's insane. I would imagine that very hard. What a gift though your agent gave you, that education.
I've been with her since day one, book one. And I think any change in I've had a lot of changes in direction in my career, and she's been there to be incredibly supportive through the long-term arc of my career. But she's my friend, but she's also brutally honest, which is what you want. And, she's a protector of, of our work and of our image and of our, I don't want to sound coarse, but of our brand. And she's exactly right. If I had written something less than and she'd sent it out, no matter how desperate I was for money and for a contract,
right.
I wouldn't be here talking to you right now. That none of this would have happened. So, I tell writers that a lot. You sometimes have to slow the heck down and deep breath time it and just go slowly and it will pay off, I promise.
Yeah, the speed that writers want to work versus the speed that publishing works at is you're like, how did this? We have a question from a viewer. Wade from Allie. Do you prefer writing fiction or the memoir?
Do you know what's interesting? I love writing both, and I have to say, I have my first memoir in a decade coming out in May,
What?
and I do, yeah. It's from Hanover Square, imprint of HarperCollins, and so I don't know how I wrote that along with everything else, but it's a beautiful book, and I actually, I was going to say, like, even like reading other authors' works, like writing memoir again made me, I think, a much better fiction writer.
Mhm.
It's, I'm much sparer. I'm just really, I think, hope to get to the essence of the emotion. I don't, the memoir is 250 pages. Rather in the past, I would go 400.
Right.
Just, it's about me and my relationship with my dad. I was a true Ozarks man. The only thing that bonded us was our love of baseball. And it goes, inning by inning over the very last game we watched together, and looks at our life. And really, it seeks to ask, as kids, we only want unconditional love from our parents, and it often doesn't come.
Yeah, show up.
It's haunting, and yet we fight for it. So I'm really proud of it. But I love writing both. And then I started writing my next novel, and I'm like, ooh, I'm really excited to do that, and I feel like I'm coming at it from a totally different place now. So that's been a blessing.
Oh, that's really exciting. What's the name of the memoir coming out?
It's called Magic Season.
One click that, everybody. One click that. So another thing that I love about all of your books that I really loved about this one in particular is how important the setting is. And when I read one of your books, I'm reminded of the truth that I sometimes forget, that the specific is universal, right? Like that specifics, like even when you think no one has been to Traverse City, or not, obviously not no one, but 2/3 of your audience has never been to Traverse City, but the way that you describe it, like a local, makes it universal, because everybody has walked down a hometown street, right? Like whether it's that street or another street, like it is, the setting is very universal. And you are passionate about writing about Michigan.
I am. And I have to say,
in Palm Springs.
I know. I would say people in Michigan want to punch me in the throat right now they do. But it's true. It's like when I read your novel, being in that orchard brought me truly back to Ozarks memories rather than Michigan memories of picking fruit with my grandmas, and the quiet and the stillness and the families that had owned these orchards forever, and you could see them labor. And we would pick strawberries and blackberries and blueberries, but you're exactly right. It is that is universal. I love Michigan. I moved there purposely from St. Louis about 16 years ago. I fell in love with it. As you know, Michigan, do this. It's one of the most beautiful states in the nation, and the coastline, west coast up to north, it's like the Hamptons. It's quirky resort towns with great histories and amazing beauty. But I grew up, I loved, Pat Conroy, Dottie Frank. I love Nancy Thayer, Ellen Hildebrand, Mary Alice Monroe. People that have captured the Low Country or Nantucket so viscerally and beautifully. I wanted to do that, and I don't want to stray from that setting. I love, I don't think I will ever run out of resort towns in Michigan to pick as a setting that are so gorgeous, and they tie into the histories of the books that I write too. So it's been a godsend, truly.
And this one, you were also able. So it sounds like you spend most of your winter in Palm Springs.
I do, yeah.
Which is probably why you still love Michigan, I'm guessing.
We moved and lived in Michigan for 3 straight winters, and 2 of those were 2 of the worst winters in the last 50 years. And I mean, it snowed every day, and it was bitterly cold. And people would say, as a writer, you should do so well in that environment. And I went mental. I think the clouds, it's so cloudy on the West Coast. You just need some light, or I do. Well, I mean, And that changes me. So Palm Springs, really, I do, I'm writing 2 books a year now. So I feel like I get one done here and then I go back to sunny now, and I get the best of both.
So I was imagining as I was reading the book, the sort of joyful research, like you watching old YouTube videos of weather, of the crap that local stations used to make weather men and women go through. Like, what was the research to get? Because you put Sunny into some fun spots.
I did, as you know, torture and also to confront memory. And I have a very dear friend in Michigan at the Wood TV NBC station named Terry DeBoer, and she helped me out a lot with meteorology stories, things that she's had to do, stories that she's had to cover, activities they've made her do, that were really funny and quite awful, even down to me writing about how they stayed warm, what they put on underneath to survive outside.
Yeah.
Because they send them out into the elements because they know people are going to watch.
Yeah.
They're going to go down, they're going to fall, something's going to happen. So they're tortured, and it was fascinating. But I also wrote about, women in TV, as you know, are held to a higher degree and a totally different standard than their male counterparts. What their contracts or, what hair color they have to have, what weight they must maintain, what colors of clothes they should wear. It's not nice, and it's not fair. And so Terry and some friends of mine really gave me a lot of in-depth background. But I do love researching. In Michigan, any town that I set a book in, I stay in, I vacation, I see friends, whatever it is, for a couple of weeks.
Oh, wow. So I really felt like you don't live in Traverse City?
No, I live in Saugatuck, just south of.
Wow, that's funny. Wow, because I mean, as a person who's been to Traverse City a bunch of times, I actually went to, it's just between you and me, I went to university in St. Louis. I lived in St. Louis for a gazillion years. No, not
Did you?
5.
Where'd you go in St. Louis?
Webster University.
Webster University.
Go Gorlocks.
Actually, I interviewed to be the communications director at Webster University before I started my writing career. I did not get the job. I was the second candidate, but they hired a TV guy from one of the ABC stations, I think. But yeah, I know Webster very well. It's grown exponentially over the years.
Yeah, it was a weird, quirky little fine arts. I was just telling the story about how my husband and I met, and it was a fine art school, and they do the fine art party, like, everybody's showing off their art and you walk around with wine. And the main feature was an artist who had been taking roadkill and pressing it between plexiglass and painting the plexiglass. And we're all like standing around drinking, paper cups of wine, like, yes, the roadkill.
Okay. So how did that look?
Oh, it looked terrible. And like there was a smell. There was a real smell.
They needed to do a little more work on that, didn't they?
I'd imagine that kid got an A. Sure. Yeah. So anyway, back to your book. The other thing that I love about the book, and I think it's a thing that you touch on with all your books, but this it really resonated with me in this one, is that maybe because she was returning to the community, but it's about community. Like, your characters, even while in denial of needing it, are in need of community and how they find it. Like, that's such a powerful part of all of your books.
Yeah, it's, I grew up in a small town, and I ran from it, just like Sunny does in the book. Especially if you have a tragedy in a small town, people see you for the tragedy, not for who you are. So sometimes you just have to run for self-defense or to reinvent yourself. But it's the things I ran from, I did miss, which is why I think I went from St. Louis and Chicago back to little Saugatuck, Michigan, which is an adorable little resort town, is the quaintness and safety as a kid that I loved, I ended up missing as an adult. You had the little coffee shop that you always went to. You had your favorite restaurant. You knew the postmaster by first name. All of those things I had, and I started to miss as I grew older. And it's interesting. I had a great conversation with Cheryl Woods a number of years ago, and she said she feels more authors are returning to this because we can live anywhere. She goes, when I grew up, when you grew up, you're more home, wherever your family grew up, that's where you stayed.
Mm-hmm.
She goes, now you can live and work anywhere. And yet we kind of still want that. There's a return to wanting that, which is why she said my books she believes have done well. There's that small community still resides in us somewhere.
Yeah, that's a good point. Another thing that I truly loved about the book, and was your mom a hospice nurse as well?
She was, yeah.
My mom was too.
No, seriously.
And like I've often thought about who, like, and tell me if your experience is different. That nurses are just the most practical, pragmatic. An emergency comes and they just like lock down. So having children that want to write or do something in any way dramatic or artistic, like they just totally supportive, but like, oh, you're so dramatic, Molly. Was that your experience with your mom?
100%. Like, it's so funny because I have a little sinus thing and people were like, do you take anything? You always wait too long. You never, and I'm like, unless I had a bone coming out of, it was not an emergency for my mother. I mean, it was not a big deal. It's just, a cold was nothing to her. It had to be, because my mom in our little town was, there wasn't a doctor around. So if someone cut off their toe with a, lawnmower or a finger with a chainsaw, they called my mother. And she would always be like, igloo cooler, ice, be there in a second. You're exactly right. So it was always very calm. Nothing was and I was always like, oh my God, my hair, feather.
I just want to be with my boyfriend.
My mother's like, I saw someone die. This is nothing. So yes, that same experience. And I think that probably made us even more so.
I know it's very, with your sinus thing. Have you tried the warm water and salt the way our mothers would have told us?
I did warm water and salt, and it does. You know what? I think it does help. All those stupid things. I'm like, God, I do revert back.
Yeah, my next book is it's November 2022, and it's tentatively called The Sunshine Girls, but it's about a lot of things. But it's about nurses in Midwestern towns and going to nurses training in Midwestern towns. Yeah, and I really mind my mom's stories about this. And my question for you, like, are you nervous or anything like that? And my mom is just so practical, and I've added this level of drama to the stories that my mom has told me. And part of me is like, this is exciting and fun, and my mom's super into it. And part of me is like, is this detracting from like what was real and true? And like, it's just a real complicated thing.
It sounds fascinating to me because, I look at my mother and I think my mother was brilliant. And she always wanted to go to medical school and become a doctor. And it just wasn't, it wasn't something that was expected or she did. And she kept studying her whole life. And I always my whole life admired not only her career, but her friends, because they were so smart and so dedicated to their work and just seemed to know everything to me. So I'll be fascinated to read, this. And, my mom, she told me one of her first residencies, she worked at a psych hospital in Nebraska. And of course, I'm like, oh my God, tell me everything. And she's like, it was, it's all by the board. And I'm like, oh, I'm sure not.
I'm sure not. No. Once my mom told me one, it's a doozy of a story that's in the book, but then, yeah, she had to do a rotation in a psych ward, and you're just like, and the thing that killed me about it. So, my mom would have been there, in the 50s, and you go from having, decorum and modesty like bulldozed into you, being that's it, being modest is it, and then suddenly you're touching naked bodies. Like you're really touching naked bodies. And I was sort of fascinated by that. Like the whiplash of that scenario had to be shocking. And my mom always said that like they lost, 20 people would leave the class because like they drop out because that's a bridge too far.
It's true. And I always think of what they wore. Like my mother at the first of her career, she had the starched white and the hat. And she's like, she used to say, can you imagine the least practical thing for a nurse to wear? Like, it's the stupidest thing.
That really is. Wow. I'm so sorry. We absolutely derailed this conversation into our mothers and
this is the best.
What? So tell us. So you have the memoir about your father coming out in May, and then what is your next fiction novel?
It's called The Edge of Summer. It's the next Viola Shipman novel. It's out in July, and it's inspired by my grandma's buttons and button jars, and the pearl button industry in Michigan and the Midwest at the turn of the century, which was one of the largest employers of men and women. Terrible conditions, but it's fascinating how these beautiful buttons were made and got into women's sewing kits and baskets. It was a long, hard process, but it's a lot about essential. I don't want to give too much away, but the essential story is really why those things in our lives and people that we value, we sometimes easily toss aside for things and others we think have more worth. So it's a linchpin of Viola, but it's a beautiful story about a woman finding herself and who her mother really was. Because, I used to think of, it's stupid memory, but the reason I wrote the book is I remember sitting in my grandmother's sewing rooms and watching them sew. They had these beautiful Singer sewing machines. And they were so happy and content. And yet I knew, even as a kid, how hard their lives had been. And I'm like, how did they get here right now, sitting here with their grandchild watching them and look so content and happy when I know point A to point B could not have been easy? So that's what always kind of fascinated me to write this book about how this woman came to be.
The Edge of Summer.
The Edge of Summer, yeah. They got to do a summary title. I had a different title, but the cover's gorgeous, and yeah, I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, they know what they're doing with those titles.
Like, they know what they're doing.
It's a book about buttons. Like, no, it's a book about summer. Well, I can't wait for both of those. And thank you so much you are the busiest Santa's elf this week in promotion for this book. Tell us real quick about, I'm sorry, I am going to let you go. Tell us real quick about the Thursday nights, what you do on Thursday nights.
Yeah, before I joined you, I do it's called Wine and Words with Wade. It's a Facebook Live on the Viola Shipman page every Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. And tonight we did our office holiday party. So we did Christmas trivia, and Gary dressed up as Santa, Mrs. Claus, and a book blogger named Jenny. It was just as horrific as you can imagine and just as wonderful as you can imagine. And so we do giveaways as thank yous to readers. And so I'm going to have you on. I interview authors, we have publishing insiders, and I talk a lot about writing, inspiration and hope, how to handle rejection in life and art. We do lots of fun things and also a lot of deep things, and it's a blast to do.
Oh, that's awesome. Everybody listening, go check that out on the Wade Rouse. No, it's on the Viola Shipman Facebook page. Go pick yourself up The Secret of Snow. Prepare yourself for The Edge of Summer and for the memoir with your father's name was Magic Season. Get them all, guys. You don't want to miss out on this. Thank you for joining us, Wade. Have a very happy holiday.
Thank you. Happy holidays, Molly.
Everybody out there, stay safe, read a book, have a drink, get vaccinated. Good night, guys.